Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Fred Packard. Joining me today, I have Mr. Paul Louise-Julie. How the hell are you doing today, Paul?
Doing great, man. How's happy to be here? Thanks.
Well, thanks for coming. Excited to have you back on. It's been a little bit since we last talked. What's new in your life?
Man, a lot. I mean, finally dropped the Hansi trailer, and then that pretty much like kicked us off into a whole new phase of production, not just on that, but on a few other projects as well. So, I mean, we had a little bit of a hump, to get there, as far as logistics are concerned, but we're here now. So, it's just, full steam ahead at this point.
Yeah, I got a chance to look at the Johanse trailer. You did that all on your own, right?
Visually, yes. The music was done by someone named Joel Santos. He scored that in one night, which is pretty impressive. But all the other visuals, the animation, that's all me.
Dude, the quality of this work is just absolutely insane to me.
Thanks, bro.
It's like, just kind of flipping through here. Walk me through the process of how you. Well, first off, why don't we introduce you, what you do, right? So you kind of are in the forefront of this Afro sci-fi community, and from you're my first in on getting behind and learning more about the culture behind it and things like that. Obviously, there's Black Panther, but you've been creating comic books for a long time now. You created the Pack, you created Johanse, and just kind of introduce what you do exactly.
Well, I mean, saying I'm on the forefront is pretty flattering. So, thanks. I would say that when I first jumped into it in 2015, which is when I started doing comics professionally, the scene was much more of a very niche scene. It was very, very underground. Because technically, thanks to Black Panther, as far as the comics are concerned, that's been around for for a long time. So you have people that were into that kind of thing, but it was very much like a small, a counterculture, and very few people knew about it. And so when I started that, it was still in that phase, because this is about 1 year before Black Panther dropped, the actual movie dropped. And when so when I was doing it, I was still trying to get interest in it. And at the time, even amongst other people of color, there wasn't so much of an interest in Afrofuturism or picturing people of African descent in a futuristic context, or beyond that. It was more of how do we create stories that we relate to us right now in our current life, and there's definitely relevance for that too. But it was hard trying to convince people over to that, and then a few other creators that popped around the same time as me, like Royal Coupe as well. He had the same challenge, and then the moment that Black Panther hit, it was like a huge switch. All of a sudden, everybody's onto it, and that really helped. People started to see this is an actual genre that you can actually want to explore, and that allowed us to push more stories. That we actually had. It's a young genre, but it's also an old one. It's weird. It's kind of this in-between thing. So I start off in comics. I start with the series called The Pack, which is more Afro fantasy than sci-fi. I mean, it's got werewolves in it, but it's like Egyptian werewolves. And that was part of a general fantasy world that I created based on ancient Africa. And that was, and I'm still working on it right now, just in a different incarnation. So we start off in comics. When I say we, I mean myself. Start off in comics, and did about 4 issues of The Pack, and then I complete a full run of Johanse. And after that, I decided that the stories I want to tell are so big, it just makes much more sense to tell them on screen as opposed to comics. And I do enjoy comics, but it's just so comics. Weirdly enough, and I'm sure you can relate to this, are so they're so time taxing. They cost so much to do, not just financially, but you're either paying a lot of money to get it done, or you're spending a lot of time doing it on your own. And for me, it was the latter. And it just wasn't amounting to how much time I had to tell the stories. So I figured, let me try doing it in animation, or TV and film, because oddly enough, most people wouldn't think this, but you're actually able to get more done doing film than you would in comics, as far as like telling your story, in like 2 hours or an hour and a half or 30 minutes, as opposed to like 27 pages. So that was when I made the jump. And Johansi was the first one. And we're also just a few days from now, we're going to have our first production meeting for the Pack TV series, which I'm very excited about as well. So
Pack TV series.
Oh yeah. It's that I think that one I'm just excited for Johansi, but there's a part of me, because the Pack was like my firstborn, so to speak. I'm like really brimming with excitement to try and bring this world out there, because I expanded the story so much since I first did it. And this would be kind of like a reboot in the sense, and I just really can't wait to share it with people.
I've been sharing some of these stills that you sent me, and I mean, just kind of walk me through, this creative process, if you will, because I mean, the art itself is I haven't seen anything really like this in regards to your comic book art, in regards to even the animated trailer, which I'll make sure to put the link in the description of this video so people can take a look at that. But walk me through how you create something like this. Just even this image alone, because I know it's fully animated, and you did the bodies are moving, you did the action scenes, all this stuff. Walk me through the transition of moving from comic to animation, what that process is like for people that are interested in like kind of getting into that, and also just how you come up with the detail of your art.
Well, so it's a pretty loaded question, but I'll do my best to try and answer it thoroughly. You touched on something which is very relevant to this particular scene. This is one of the favorite scenes. I keep getting people talking about, like, from the trailer and the clips. It was one of my favorite to animate. It's from a very, very important scene in the actual movie. But the interesting thing about it, conceiving it, was there's several different stages. There's a conception stage, and then there's the puzzle stage, and then there's the actual building. And the reason I break it down is that when you're conceptualizing something, I have a perfect idea of it in my mind, and I know exactly what I want to do. I haven't figured out how I'm going to do it yet. I just know, okay, this is what I want to do. And the idea that I had at that time, I want to get this feeling, the very moody feeling that he's about to fight these mechanical giants, and I only wanted cinematically this reason why I work with shadows, because you're actually not giving too much detail. With the smoke and the shadows and the lighting, you're just giving enough information to insinuate what's about to happen, and you let the audience's mind fill in the rest. And that's what actually makes a much more engaging experience. And you have that many times in cinema. And when conceptualizing that scene, the color palette was directly inspired from the comic book. Like, if anyone's read the comic book, like, there's a very specific color palette that goes with Johansi. It's a very colorful book, but it's also a very moody book too. So the colors are a huge part of the storytelling. So I couldn't just go with like a normal, accurate palette, like in for the movie, I had to honor that, but still have it be somewhat more realistic. And that so having those different criteria going in showed me these are the rules I have to abide by when I'm about to build this thing. Then comes a puzzle phase. The puzzle stage is and every shot in 3D, because I was literally teaching myself how to animate as I'm doing this, by the way. Like, it's not like I've been animating for a while. Like, I was teaching myself how to animate as I'm doing these shots. And the puzzle part of it is trying to figure out how to do that. Like, how am I going to get the animation? How am I going to get the smoke in here? You have to think about render times. And interestingly enough, I just went back to old Hollywood. Like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. The different camera tricks they would use. Back in like the early 1900s. And here we are 100 years later. Doing the exact same thing, but in a digital environment. And that allowed me to bypass a lot of like rendering issues, because I don't have like Pixar or Lucasfilms resources, and it allowed me to just pull off the trick, because that's all movies are. They're just tricks. And that's exactly what I did. And then after that was the question of putting it together, and then trying to get the timing right, trying to get the animation right, and the slow motion, and that was that. But that's basically the process for this whole movie.
So walk me through how you essentially, in regards to teaching yourself animation. How long did it take you to learn?
I do not recommend it to anyone. Let me put it that way. It is it's you have to have a lot of patience. You have to have a drive for it. Like for instance, for me, my drive was that I have to get this done. I promised this to, because remember I'd done an Indiegogo like a couple of years back. I promised this to people. Obviously you can't scam people for their money when I had no intention of doing that. And I promised them that I was going to give them a trailer and give them something. So I had, and at the time when I first did the Indiegogo, I had planned on getting a much larger team, and then unfortunately things didn't work out that way financially. So I figured, look, either I give everybody their money back and then have the disappointment this thing's not going to happen, or I try to figure out how to do it on my own. And that's exactly what I did. I figured out how to do it on my own. So having that drive, really enough, was a huge factor in being able to complete the training on time, because when you have a goal, that's just going to push you through those hard nights. You're like, okay, I don't want to learn retopology. I don't want to learn modeling. I don't want to learn, scaling and sculpting and all these different, like these abstract terms. As a 2D artist, I had no idea about. I mean, 3D to me was a huge mountain when I first started it. And a huge help of it is actually the software Blender. For those that don't know, Blender is a free open source software. It's one of the most powerful 3D softwares out there. And it's the only one, to my knowledge, that's open source, meaning that it's free. And it's got like a worldwide community of like some of the best developers and engineers on the planet, and on the biggest industries that work for, like Pixar and Disney and and ILM. And they built this software. And as a result, there's a whole community around it of people teaching, tutorials, on how to actually use this, and how you can replicate all your favorite Hollywood tricks and sequences just by using the software. So it's really thanks to the Blender community that I had access to those resources, just going on YouTube and learning these tutorials, a massive amount of tutorials I had to consume. I mean, it's not like you just consume one course and all of a sudden you can do 3D animation. I had to do if I pretty much had to cram, like a 2-year degree in just a few months in order to do it. But it was that drive of making good on my promise to people.
I think what a lot of people want to know is, where do you get the inspiration for the aesthetic look of Afro sci-fi, right?
Well, so that dates all the way back to the comic. Interesting enough, I was very blessed to have done the comic first before going into the movie, because the movie, just like I explained, the movie had its own set of giants and hurdles for me to have to cross just logistically, just for building the thing. I would not have been able to also handle the figuring out of the design of Afro fantasy, specifically Afro sci-fi, during that. So to answer your question, when I first came with the concept of this particular concept Afro Johanse, and just before I go on that too, to clarify, people have thought of putting Africans in a futuristic setting before. It's just that my particular brand of it, I wanted to do something that's much more authentic. So I'm not, trying to compare myself to anyone. Just that for me personally, I wanted something more. Like I remember reading some Black Panther comics and seeing Wakanda. I'm like, well, this is good. This is all we have. But at the same time, I'm not really feeling that this can stand toe to toe to Star Wars. I don't feel that technologically this is as advanced as Iron Man's suit. I need to believe this stuff, and not just you putting like a guy with a spear and putting some tech stuff on the spear and then saying, hey, this spear is actually more advanced than Iron Man. I'm not buying it. It's just, I want to, but I'm not buying it. So there became like this, and so I had a lot of research already in African design aesthetics. And at the same time, is there
a specific area in Africa, or a tribe, or what culture did you kind of dive into?
So the interesting thing with Johanse was that I could have pulled from just one tribe if I wanted to, but the thing is that before Johanse, I had already done research on over 30 different African cultures, and each one has their own aesthetic tendencies, their own geometric tendencies, and what they want to do. They're very, very distinct from each other. So once I had that library, I had a choice. Either I can base Johanse off of one culture and do that because each culture is just as rich to do that, or I could have it as a celebration of all these different cultures, but do it in such a way where different factions or different civilizations are more strict makeup of like one or two different cultures as opposed to another one. So in Johanse, for instance, you have like 5 different factions, like different galactic empires, and each one of those empires is probably like a mashup of like 2 or 3 specific African cultures. And what that allows me to do is to create a distinct look for each one of those by using that as like a foundation, as a base. And then based on where I want to, so there's 2 halves to it. There's the African element, which is what you're pulling from the cultural sources, and then there's what do I want to do for what I want to use it for the story. So for instance, there's one empire that's more of like a holy empire, kind of like Warhammer 40K, where and they have like this whole conquest type of ideal, and I'll figure, but they're also heavily into like body modification as well. So which cultures I feel would lend themselves to that, and then I found like I really like some maps from the Igbo culture, as well as from the Bibio culture, like in West Africa, and then I started playing with those, and then before you know it, I made a race with that, and it's really like a trial and error, very like an organic kind of like gooey process where you're just trying a lot of stuff. It's like messing with clay, and then you find something and you just kind of like perfect it, and then before you know it, you have these different cultures on the screen. And then the other part of Johanse, and this is where you're not necessarily trying to go out and make a culture. You have certain African shapes, and if you really understand African design language, it takes a long time to study, then you already have that in one side of your head. On the other side of your head, if you're a sci-fi nerd, you're like, okay, well, I know that for instance, this image you're showing right here, I know I wanted to show a gas mining planet. And because I remember like being a kid, and I was really drawn into Cloud City, and I really liked
Bespin, Cloud City.
Oh yeah. Bespin's the planet. Cloud City's the and I was really drawn to the visual aesthetic of that. Seeing that for the first time. And I was thinking, okay, how would I capture that, but in a unique way? So those that read the comics, they saw what I did with that. And that first idea was to create, I really liked, certain orange hues that I found in Africa that I remember seeing in Africa. So if I want to capture an African sunset, and then how would I do it differently? So instead of having, Cloud City like this floating disc, which I could do, I'm like, what if I had the buildings be like these giant, like monoliths that are stylized, vague versions of like African sculptures, and then from there go on and make different patterns and different lighting patterns and and textures to really sell that these are like industrial gas mining plants, if you will, that kind of floating in the air. So that was where it started from.
I think in regards to, I really enjoy the world building that you do in your books, and also the assignment. I mean, I'm Irish and Italian, right? Well, Sicilian. So I've dived a lot into right now I'm writing a book that you're planning on illustrating, right? So
yeah, wait, man.
Which is a very Celtic story. And diving into other people's cultures, I think, is something that's definitely needed. And I think there is a much needed place for, because everything is very European, right? So you have like European sci-fi, you have European fantasy, and it's very much that was kind of what was pushed, at least until now, right? So now you have Black Panther and yourself, and then you have all these different creators that are creating all these amazing, projects, and you're seeing a different take on sci-fi. Right. I would love to see a futuristic world, that you've created. Even living in it, going walking in it, and exploring it. It's a really different culture, and I think you've done a really good job of staying to the roots and doing a lot of research.
Thanks.
And pulling from things from African history, and really bringing that out. I mean, I remember watching like Zulu with my dad, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated with, you see these colonials, that are, they have their hats on and their muskets, and then you have the Zulu who are, very tribal. And I was very taken away by that movie as a kid. I remember it left a very big impression on me.
Yeah.
And now seeing it, in the future, and seeing kind of where you took like this kind of idea of, I think you've done a really good job for it. And just kind of going through the rest of these.
Just that you mentioned Zulu, because just Johanse's fighting style is very is directly derived from the Ngoni martial art of the Zulus, which would have a very sophisticated martial art actually that goes along with that. And the interesting thing is that because I added, and my fight choreographer Damon Stith, who's doing the fight choreography for this film, like, he was really excited because he was saying the mere fact that you have Johanse's spear that can change size and shape means I can fuse like 3 different martial arts from across the continent into one, and have him have like this adaptive, style that's very, very unique to watch. And I got excited when I saw it because I wasn't thinking about that when I made it in the comic. And here's like an actual, like, an African martial artist, and he's saying, no, do you realize like what we can do with this? And he showed me like this gorgeous choreography that him and his choreography team Cry Havoc did. And it's very interesting because I grew up loving Star Wars as a kid. I still love Star Wars. And one of the things that I've always been enamored with was actual lightsaber fighting and the lightsaber style. And I didn't realize until later that there was a lot of the things I liked about lightsaber fighting were actually pulled from African stick fighting. Because I didn't notice that until I started studying African stick fighting, which is, and by African, there are several different disciplines from across the continent, some dating all the way back to ancient Egypt. The most popular was the one dating back to ancient Egypt, which is called Tatib. And that alone has many things, that certain moves that we liked in the lightsabers that are kind of in there. And that just opened my mind to this whole world of African martial arts. And the reason why that's so relevant to Johanse is that going in, naturally, your first instinct is to try and create the equivalent of a lightsaber. If you're going to do like a space opera, like, no, that's so Star Wars. Let's try and do a challenge. I'm like, well, you could do like a sword. Well, I don't want to do that because it's too easy too. So why not take like a shield and spear? And I knew nothing of shield and spears at the time. And that's how I started to study African martial arts. And by that exercise and unlocking this wealth of things that I did not know just because I took that challenge on, it pretty much informed my ideology for the rest of the whole series, which is going in and take the hard route and figure out how to do this. And in the end, you end up with something that is so unique, that's something that's hard to copy because people don't know where to start with it. It's so alien, and that's the feel. I want Johanse to feel alien. I mean, you mentioned earlier like about how like your Irish and Italian heritage. I mean, I grew up loving the Lord of the Rings, which is highly inspired by Nordic and a little bit of Celtic and Germanic culture. And one of the things I loved about it, what Tolkien did, was pulling from his own heritage and creating a fictional world based off of that, and to make it a relevant mythology for his generation. Because his problem was that he felt that the English at the time didn't have any mythology that was inherent to them. They had borrowed mythology. Like King Arthur is actually French. It's Norman. And there are elements of Germanic in there too. There's a little bit of Celt. There's a little bit of Nordic. And he said we have all these things as borrowed. We need an actual English mythology. And I interestingly enough, as much as I enjoyed the Lord of the Rings, that same mission kind of echoed to me as I'm enjoying his work, where I'm like, I wish we had this for us. I wish that I had something that really resonated to me. So on one hand, I want to do Afro fantasy, but on the other hand, I love picturing us in the future, which quite frankly was really lacking as far as images. But I had to challenge myself to remove like this patronizing glow that sometimes people give towards African or Black stuff. Where that's good enough for for a Black person, like that. It's like at least you try. This is good when full well this doesn't stand shoulder to shoulder with the more mainstream stuff. I want something that if people look at it, they're like, yeah, I like it, not just because it's African or Black. I just like it because it's as cool as Star Wars, or it's cooler than that. That's what I want. That's how you really try. It's really how you level the playing field.
I completely agree with you in that regard. I do think to a certain degree Black Panther was that for a lot of people. However, I do feel like it was fit into an already established universe that was, that it was a piece to an already existing universe versus being its own thing. Right. So, but let's play the trailer. I don't know if I could play the sound. But because of copyright issues and things like that. But let's play the trailer for everybody to watch, and see what everybody thinks. Oh. Was it not showing?
Yeah. You have to keep it in the small screen for it to show.
Ah, okay. Let's restart it then, so everybody can see this. One second. Let me see if I can actually add the sound to this. I don't know if I can, but I'm going to try. I don't think I can, but let's play it for people to kind of see, because we've been talking about it enough. And I think people should. All right, my shitty internet doesn't do it justice, but everybody should listen to that. And the actual audio was on point too.
Shout out to Joel Santos for that. He, like I said, he buckled down and did that whole thing from scratch in one night. Delivered it to me. He literally had it in my hands. I think like a few hours before I was supposed to drop it live. Like it was.
I was on the phone. I was talking to you.
That's right. Yeah.
We had a
wire. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, that's right.
What I would like to do is actually kind of dive into a little bit of Tolkien. So I just got done watching. It was like a documentary movie. It's on HBO. I encourage everybody to watch it. I didn't realize how crazy of a life J.R. Tolkien had. Right. So you have this guy, this kid whose father dies. Right. Earl, we've. 1 second. Got a comment here. Need more Kana.
Kana's a character in your Hansei.
So in regards to Tolkien, so his father dies, right? His mother's taking care of him and his younger brother. His mother dies unexpectedly, right? Mm. And then he is taken in by a priest, him and his younger brother. And he is doing everything he can to. He's super smart, right?
Yeah.
He gets into it's Oxford. I think it was Oxford.
I think it was.
So he gets into Oxford, and he's about to flunk out. And he's been dating this girl that was also at this orphanage with him, right? And for those of you listening, we're talking about J.R. Tolkien, the creator of Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and his kind of his life story. So he's at this orphanage. He's about to flunk out of school because he starts dating this girl and he's falling in love with this girl. He's taking her on all these dates, and he's saving all his money to do so. In the meantime, he's writing these stories, living in this orphanage. And the priest who took him in said, listen, you need to stop dating this girl otherwise you're going to flunk out of school. Meanwhile, he has this close group of friends that took him in, and he has this bond with them, and they're all poets and writers and authors in their own right. So he still ends up flunking school, and then the girl ends up getting engaged to another man. And when he finds this out, he gets drunk, and that's when he created the Elvish language. He gets drunk, and he's walking through the courtyard of Oxford, and he's screaming, drinking a bottle in Elvish. And then the linguist professor hears him and goes and finds him, and then actually gets him to transfer his major over to what he ended up doing. And then that it was all because he created the Elvish language, which I thought was absolutely mind-boggling to me. I'm like, so this dude got to stay in Oxford because he created a language.
That was actually the prototype of the Elvish language, actually.
Right. He worked on it
through several incarnations before creating Quenya and Sindarin. But the thing is that he liked creating languages in general, and so as a matter of fact, that was where his love of mythology came from, because he liked how languages can really define a people. So many times when he would create a language, he would create a story or people to go along with it just as an excuse to use the language. Because the tricky thing with creating, dead languages or fictional languages is that no one's speaking them. So you need to find an excuse to use all this stuff. So if you don't have people using an actual dialogue, then you create a fake dialogue of people that actually use it. And then what are they going to talk about? They'll talk about things that are relevant to their culture. And that's where, he came from with that.
So after he gets to stay in school, World War I breaks out, right? So World War I breaks out, and him and his best friends get sent off to the war. Before he leaves, he sees the girl that he loves that's engaged to another man. And she says that, and she loves him too, kind of a thing. And she says that she's going to wait for him. So she calls off the engagement and waits for him while he goes and fights in World War I. All of his best friends die except for, I think, one. And he has such severe post-traumatic stress disorder that they're not even that close anymore. He ends up writing the foreword for one of his friend's books that comes out later on as a book of poetry. And then he has children, and then he writes The Hobbit, and he recites The Hobbit to his children through word of mouth, and then writes it down as he's telling the story to his kids. But I thought was really ingenious, like just a genius man. And it's a crazy story going from orphan, losing both his parents, to Oxford, to then being a professor at Oxford, to writing The Lord of the Rings, going through World War I, losing all of his friends. Such a tragic, crazy story. But it's a real story. And
the interesting thing to keep in mind about his story too is that the time that things happened, the dude really had a life. The reason why he particularly inspired me was because when you look closer and you see the real trauma this man went through, and then fighting through that at several different stages to then create the art. At that point, these are no longer just stories. I think that's the reason why Middle Earth is so timeless and so inspiring to not just fans of European mythology, but just people that want to create mythology in general, because it showed this kind of cathartic healing power of what creating mythology does and the value that it gives to you. Like, one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of those stories that he started creating, for the Silmarillion and building the prototype of Middle Earth, these were stories and poems that he'd created with his friends, his group of friends. And keep in mind too, they're very young kids at the time; they were teenagers. So have these really young kids, in the throes of they're creating these worlds, and they're having a ball doing it. All of a sudden, they're thrown into the horror of World War I. And to give context of what World War I meant to people at that time, this is not just any other war. This was the first fully mechanized industrial warfare war, where up until that time, colonial era, like you had Gatling guns, you had things, but this is the first time.
Trench warfare too. The first time for trench warfare.
Yeah. First time trench warfare. The first time where you can see, like an entire battalion of people mowed down in seconds, like that. Imagine what that does to the psyche. Seeing people like who's still staying right next to you, they're blown up, and then you have like their flesh all over you. That was your friend that you were just talking to minutes ago. Traumatically, and then the hell of just the slow kill of psychological war. It destroyed an entire generation. Particularly, like in Europe. and Tolkien was the only one left of his friends. You know, like he was the only one that so then he had that survivor's guilt of feeling that he was the one that sometimes he was even saying that he wished that he had gone instead of being the one to have the burden of telling their stories.
I think he was Sam in Lord of the Rings.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. Sam is a huge inspiration of him because he remembers like that. You know that you need that one person to keep you going. In a way, I think more Sam was the embodiment of his friends, where like his friends' spirits that he's keeping with him, and like, no, you need to keep going. You need to tell our stories. You know, like you need to show the world how it was before the war broke out. You know, you need to show, and that's the reason why he really hated. If you really look at the symbolism behind Mordor and Sauron, and the reason why it's so it's so terrifying. It's not that he created like this evil empire that's based off of civilization. It's based off of the our industrial postmodern world. If you look at Mordor, what is it? You know, it's all these different furnaces and and factories. They're destroying the natural world to create the soulless, hellish environment. And the last bit of light, which is based in nature, the elves and all that, is trying to fight that. That's where it all comes from. And so it wasn't so much that the ring was an allegory for anything. It's just that he needed to communicate that you don't have to accept this as a new status quo, this new world. Because for us, we're living in it now. It's been almost 100 years since we've been living in that kind of world. For him, he's from a generation that it was before that, and they're just being thrown into that. So it was very painful for him, putting that in there, and to just not lose hope when this, immeasurable cloud of darkness that the world has never seen before is in there. For by World War II, at that time, remember, at this point, he's an older man. He's a professor at Oxford, and he's still writing those stories, but he's seeing it happen all over again. Imagine psychologically what that does to him at this time too, because he's like, I already went through that as a young man. Now I'm seeing another generation that are my students. That
far off in terms of time.
He pretty much saw like an entire generation of his students wiped out. They didn't come back. I mean, imagine what that does to him too. Like he's seeing these promising students that probably like careers are probably going to be other future J.R.R. Tolkien's, linguists, and their light was snuffed out just like that in a horrible war. So the interesting thing about the Lord of the Rings having so much war in it, coming from someone who actually detested war in general, makes it that much of a poignant thing. Because if you're doing it for the sake of doing it, it becomes exploitation. If you're doing it with a purpose and you're showing it in its reality, there's layers to it. There's depth to it. That's the reason why Helm's Deep is one of the most, both in the book and in the movie, are one of the most, is one of the most impressive sequences of a war that I've ever seen. As a matter of my personal opinion, even more so than the final battle at
we can get in on Return of the King versus I
know I like them both. I think it's a perfect trilogy.
I think it's a perfect trilogy. So it's my favorite trilogy too. But
Helm's Deep really resonated to me, like the fear. I mean, the terror of the Uruk-hai. You think, okay, these things are so unhuman. They're going to eat us. It's not.
So what is your? Kind of get back to let's kind of stay on your projects here. What is your Uruk-hai like? And by the way, this is a beautiful cityscape. Even though it's not I didn't know it was a gas planet, which is really
the interesting thing here is that these are releasing a little secret here. Those structures are inspired by Tuareg tent poles. So the Tuaregs are a nomadic group in the Sahara Desert, and they, when they pitch their tents, you have several different poles they're holding it. These are basically the pillars that are holding your house up. So naturally, that's going to have a certain significance in their culture, and all different shapes have to do, with different, ancestral powers and spirits or a symbolism. So it creates these really intricate, designs. And I thought, what if you had, because the key to Afrofuturism is to not be too overt with it. You can't just take something, from like an African gift shop and then throw it out there and then put it, next to like a gun or a spaceship and say now it's futurist. It's like it's like Italian cooking. You can't just take the ingredients and throw them into a plate. You have to actually work them. The ingredients are important. That's only half of it. You have to actually process it and and cook it together. So once I had those tent poles, I figured, how do I make these work into things that can function as cities, but you can also see that they're also gas plants. And I remember, when you'd go by certain docks or certain factories, and you would see like these tall structures or towers, in silos, and they would have like these weird, scaffolding that would be going through them. I thought, well, I can work with that. And then it's a question of just trying to reconcile that in a design way. And once you have that, that's like these different images. In each design, actually, there's probably 4 different designs, 4 different variations of those buildings, and each one of those buildings has a different purpose. Like one is to extract the fuel from the sky. Another one is to process it. Another one is to refine it, and another one is for export. Like there's different things. There's another one that are on the perimeter to protect from like the windstorms that will be coming through. So it's just, yeah, like my mind just goes crazy with like the detail. And the thing is that scene is probably only like 5 minutes of the whole movie, but there's so much thought that goes into that one world to create that, because that 5 minutes, it's a glimpse into another world. You want to believe that it's real. And I think that there's not enough detail sometimes when people, when people put stuff like this together, because you need to convince people that, that just for a second, believe with me for a second, this is another planet. This is actually real. And you can take it seriously, the same way that you would take our world seriously. If it's too goofy, then, if that's what you want, fine. But if not, then it just kind of defeats the purpose, and people aren't going to take you seriously.
And then you also sent me over some concepts, which I think would be kind of a cool thing to take a look at here. Let me see here. The Johanse concept art. Okay, so some of these are absolutely just stunning, right? So, like this is probably one of my favorite images ever.
Yeah, a lot of people like that. Did you notice it was in the trailer?
Yeah, no, it's that's one of my favorite. The detail on this is really, I don't know if it's playing with my eyes or however you did this, but it's beautiful. There's no way around it. It's just a really cool
first images I made. When I was so after I came with Johanse, the first thing I did was the poster. I had no idea what the story was going to be, what the world was going to be. I literally just did the poster first, because I figured, what would the movie poster look like if this came out, like when I was a kid, and Star Wars. And then I figured, okay, what would the story be? But in order to create the story, I had to figure, okay, what would certain scenes look like? And I wanted to create, one of the cool things about Star Wars is that it's a world that feels very lived in. A lot of people feel that way about Star Wars. The aesthetic is that it's a world that is technologically advanced, but the people take it for granted because they lived in it for so long. So you have certain things that are on the verge between ruins, but they're also technological, marvels that are beyond what we have. So it creates like this weird paradox for us to look at, where is it behind us or is it in front of us? We're kind of like, in there. So how do you create that with African art? So one of the key things about African art on its own is that these are very stylized geometric shapes. And the whole Art Deco movement, from the 1930s, heavily stole from African art in order to create this kind of modern feel. And the interesting thing is that Art Deco is always going to be associated with like a new modern take, just culturally in America. So by definition, in our eyes, if you look at African art, it already looks very modern. It's very stylized. So how do you capitalize off of that, but also tap into the old part, the old feeling that you get from Africa? So the different materials they're using, the scratch paint sometimes, or you want to feel that this is like an ancestral type of feel that you get from that. So you have those two elements there, trying to pull from that, and then you have the technological element. How do you mix that with technology without it feeling like you juxtaposed it? Like, how's it? Like, I didn't want to feel as if I just took a mask and put it on a door. I want to feel as if the shapes of the mask and the things that you have in there are part of the same stylistic engineer that built that door. It's all part of it. And, that push and pull of walking that fine line and figuring out how far you go into design is the birth of Johanse. And I had to carry that same ideology for everything else. Like if you have like the speeder bikes, that I sent you to as well, like in the images.
Let's see here. 1 second.
Yeah, the second image.
This one right here.
Yeah. So this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, where this is probably one of my favorite sequences in Yohansi. It's going to be in the next trailer. And it's so I remember as a kid, I loved like the pod race sequence in the Phantom Menace. And the thing I liked about it wasn't so much the race itself, but the idea of taking something that we see in our regular life and how the galactic counterpart look for that, and things are completely out of context. Like it feels alien to us, but it feels familiar at the same time. So I thought, what if I made different alien cultures that each one are based off a different African culture, and then each one had like their own technology, their own aesthetic, their own their own sponsors, their own language, their own, everything on there. And what you're looking at is two races from two very different cultures. And those cultures are based off a real African culture. So the bottom red one is more inspired by the Dogon and Mali Bambara cultures. And there are a lot of different, stylistic cues that are put in there. Now, if you really studied their art, you would recognize where those cues are, but they're mixed up in such a way that it's not so obvious. But you just tell that, okay, this looks alien to me. It looks African, but I can't exactly pinpoint how or what part it is. And that's the thing with Yohansi. You have to really, really work it to where it still feels African. You can still feel the essence of it. But if you put it next to like the African source, like, yeah, well, this is futuristic and this is, African, but this is futuristic, this is traditional, but they're both African. And that's, so that was a fun project to work on.
And then these are the buildings you're talking about, right? Yeah.
So actually here, so this is the concept art. Now, because without the lighting, get a better look at what I was talking about here. So on one side, you have the silhouette. Okay, the silhouette is, different pieces I took from the Tuareg tent poles. And then on the side is how you would turn it into like a working model. So the thing with the model is that the script required it to be, these aren't just floating cities, they're floating factories as well. So at one hand, they're pieces of technology, but they're also pieces of architecture. And you have to kind of play between those, but they're also owned by one corporation, so they're going to have that branding on it. And I want to this kind of like a retro futuristic feel. So I kind of wanted to feel like it was kind of from the 80s a bit, with that kind of like design aesthetic, with the colors and the sharp, like abstract shapes. Just because I wanted that to be that culture. So with every different culture, there's always this new challenge or, like which direction do I want to go in? Because the more wild directions you go in, the wider that universe feels. It doesn't feel like they're all from the same culture. It just feels like you're in the middle of this whirlpool, this universe that you never knew about before. Yeah.
Here's another one.
Yeah. So as you can see here, the same design approach, but the idea behind it is that each building has a different purpose, like I mentioned before. So I think this one is called the extractor, and this one's purpose is simply to extract the. So if you saw in the still, you have these kind of like these little egg robots. They're like egg drones. Those drones are
the jellyfish.
No. The jellyfish are like the natural fauna of the planet.
Oh, okay. Might
as well be like birds, but there's like these little drone robots. And those robots are what go around to siphon, they're the farming tools, basically. They siphon the raw fuel from the atmosphere. Then they go to this building, this blue building right here. And then they come in and then the canister are extracted from them. Then it goes through an extraction process and goes through the whole, factory. So it's a whole system. But again, that's just for like one sequence. That's the background to another sequence. It's just like the level of detail that's in it.
Who is this?
So remember, so Earl asked her, "Where we need more Kana?" This is Kana. She's a fan favorite from the comics.
Let's see. Earl said, "We need more Kana."
yeah, exactly.
Here it is. Yes. We have more.
Here's Kana. There you go, Earl. So Kana, interesting enough, she's a fan favorite from the comics. There's no way I was going to get away without putting her in there. She does have a very relevant part to play in the movie. But I had to tease her a little bit because I can't give away what she does in the movie. But there's a lot of thought in trying to redesign her, because in the comics I designed her, but in this one with everything I wanted to push it further, make it even more cutting edge, much more African, but much more futuristic. And this was one of the early design concepts for her. Like her mask is actually, I might be wrong here. I think it's inspired by a Dogon mask for the Dogon people in Mali. And then her hairstyle is directly inspired by the Mali Bambara people, which is West Africa too. And her sword, I forgot. I think it comes from. I guess Earl's happy. Yeah. I think it comes from like Central Africa, and then the patterns are inspired from different tribal patterns from across. So this is just like another day in the design of Johanse, where we're just playing around with it. But there's funny enough, it seems so this is close to Kaina's design in the comics, so you can see how different it was compared to what she is now. And then even then in the trailer. So this is actually one of the earliest explorations of how I figured what an Afrofuturist city would be. I didn't know. I just knew that there would be some. The shapes would be different based off of a culture that had no European influence whatsoever or Asian influence. Like if it was 100% African, how would you build those buildings? What would be? Hey.
This dog, I swear to God, man.
How's it going? Is she your co-host now?
What you say?
Is she your co-host now?
Yeah. He might as well be. He's always by my side. Oh gosh, go play or something. Go do something. But dude, honestly, like, I mean, we could be doing this all day in regards to. I mean, the arts. You put a lot of love. I mean, you could obviously tell this is a passion project, right? So, yeah. I mean, the amount of. I mean, this even reminds me of a little bit of Star Wars and Millennium Falcon sitting in. Yeah. Mos Eisley.
Very homage to the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah. I mean, the concepts that you've done, the work you've put into this. I mean, it goes without saying, man. Like, I mean, this is something really cool, really special, and. I mean, I've been a fan since, you released the comics, and now seeing it as an animated trailer and, soon to be a movie and then hopefully a television show and all this stuff for everything that you have planned for the pack. I met you with the pack, which is, I'm a huge Egyptian.
The next time I come on, we're going to be talking about the pack. I mean, the only reason why we're not talking about it right now is because it's certain things are in production. But yeah, we have a lot of big surprise for fans of the pack. We didn't forget about them. But I really appreciate you saying that, because I'd never expected this to dominate my career. Believe it or not, I didn't really think that I was always going to be doing African-inspired stuff. I mean, you know me, that I have other ideas from inspired by many different other things, including different cultures, like certain things inspired by Celtic and Nordic culture as well. That I'm very fond of. But the reason why I took this upon myself to do was. The reason why I took this upon myself to do was because there just wasn't enough stuff out there that I felt matched up to the things that I liked that happened to be from other cultures, and there weren't enough things that matched up on the same level that represented me or people that looked like me. So I know it sounds kind of conceited because people are saying, well, you think you're the only one. No, I don't think I'm the only one. I just felt that, let me do my part to do that out there. I think that's
here we go with the comic skate thing. Yeah. Oh, it was just such bullshit. I mean, I'm just gonna kind of go out there and say, like, this whole comic skate thing is ridiculous. Like, people are be like, oh, they don't look like me, I can't support. Like, dude, like, let people have their shit. Like, let people enjoy what they want to enjoy. Creators create.
Are just whining because they're not being catered to. I mean, we saw the same thing with Star Wars. George Lucas made the mistake of pampering an entire generation by giving them anything they wanted. Just in the sake of merchandise. If they wanted certain more toys or anything, he would always make it. So the problem is that making that many people feel entitled to a franchise or to something is going to have them be very venomous when they don't get exactly what they want, 15 years later. Right. Say what you want about the prequels. It doesn't matter. If you were from the original trilogy, chances are more than likely you're going to be disappointed because it did not match the movie that you made in your head, during those 15 years. The thing is that when that happens, I think that was the first time we really saw what can happen how a fan base can turn toxic. A huge contrast to Gene Roddenberry, in Star Trek. I'm saying I love Star Wars, by the way, but I'm just saying that if we're just looking from an objective point of view, Gene Roddenberry in Star Trek made it very clear that this is 100% my thing. you know, that I'm in charge. I'm giving this to you guys, but I'm in charge. And that sounds very egotistical, but there's a certain contract that happens when you give it over entirely to the fans, because then they're not giving you time to tell your story. They've
it's no longer your story.
Story to tell.
People have these preconceived notions of a story that they are. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that happened with the sequel, which I don't want to get into the shit show of the sequel trilogy, but let's steer away from. I mean, I could talk Star Wars all day. Let's steer away.
There are only 6 Star Wars films and 2 spinoffs. That is all I'm going to say. The show does not exist.
With that being said, though, in terms of people, right? Just kind of boiling it down. There's people that do, and there's people that don't, right? And there's people that always want somebody else to do it for them, and they complain how it never gets done, right? So, I would say you're the kind of person that is a doer, and you taught yourself animation, you taught yourself how to draw, you taught yourself all these different skills, and I think that's a very noble quality to have. Somebody that goes out there. If you want something, you go out and get it, right? So I think that's something to be really proud of. Really, it's an admiring, admirable quality, right? So, what's the next step that you see yourself, like, what's something that you've always wanted to learn and do? Like, so you taught yourself animation, you taught yourself how to draw, you taught yourself how to color.
My next challenge, you mean?
Yeah. What's Paul Louise-Julie's next challenge?
Oh man, that's a good question.
That's why I'm the host.
yeah, that's why you're the host. You know what? Here's the best way to answer that. I don't really approach it as I don't really approach it as saying, okay, well, I'm doing this because it's the next challenge. I think it's the other way around, where I have a very clear idea of what I want to do, and I think to myself, what's standing in the way of me doing that? And is it something that it doesn't matter if it's big or small? It's just simply me getting to what I want to do and get it done. And up until now, it's been getting my story out there in the best possible form. And as of right now, the best possible form is either in film or TV, because I feel that film and TV is, we've gotten to a point now where it's the most accessible medium for people to really experience a story. And comics are in a way too. I think the comics are great if they're in the periphery, for the most part, of a franchise. However, you do have some comics that are just very powerful on their own. I mean, just like from Image, both Low and what was the other one? Oh my God, I forgot the other one. But the thing is that these are you do come across some franchises that work just on their own as comic books. But the thing is that when I create these visions, I always picture them cinematically. So it wasn't so much that I had all these challenges. I just knew that, okay, the end goal has to get up there. So I've been slowly clawing to get to movies as far as I can. So now that I'm something to animate, it's that I guess the next challenge would be how to teach myself to direct live action. But I think that in the meantime, I'm just gonna take my time and enjoy where I am with animation. But yeah, live action I think would be the ultimate.
I think animations are really, in terms of mediums go, I think it's something that's really developing. You see a lot of. I mean, that new Spider-Man into the whatever multiverse, whatever.
Yeah.
That was awesome. I mean, there's a lot of great stories that come out of animation, and I feel like I think we're getting to a point with CGI and things like that where you can tell any kind of story that you dream up.
Yeah.
But I still feel like it feels more natural right now in animation when it's a very elaborate.
Well, so I have this weird ideology, and the reason why when people say, well, so you chose animation because you obviously can't afford to do live action. I'm like, not necessarily. I have this ideology that there's a reason why when you look at when you look back at certain big fantasy, big budget franchises, the CGI may look a little bit dated, because CGI always ends up looking dated because you're juxtaposing it with live action footage. And live action footage, even though it does get better, over time, like technology is moving for cameras, we've kind of reached the pinnacle, if you will, of actual photography. I mean, a lot of people disagree, but I'm just saying that we're at a point now where the the leaps and bounds for physical photography is not as much as how animation is going. So as a result of that, if you fast forward 10 years from a movie that has both CGI elements and live action elements, the CGI elements are going to look much more dated than the live action elements, and therefore creating this kind of jarring, uncanny valley. And I feel that with fantasy movies and effects-based movies, there's no way they can get away from using CGI. So why not push CGI to a point where you make the whole thing CGI? I know it sounds very taboo for some people, but if you think about it, I think it would make more sense having a fully animated Star Wars movie. I mean, we saw the Clone Wars. You saw how cool that was, and that was stylized using, like 2008 CGI. Imagine if you saw the last trailer for Squadrons, which was incredible, and you saw, and that was just for a video game. And you see like how far they're pushing CGI. We use so much CGI, in live action anyway. Why just remove the live action element? Because at this point, only like 10% of it is actually live action. So
all these Disney movies that are coming out, they're like, oh, live action Lion King. Well, like, you realize it was 100% CGI.
Right. Yeah.
You went from animation to animation, just a different form of it.
Exactly. What cracks me up the most was, you remember how, like, when they were doing press for the sequel trilogy, and they kept saying, by the way, these are real sets. This is so much live action. I'm like, you guys are lying so much. They use more CGI on the sequel trilogy than they did on the prequel trilogy. But the thing is that the technology
actually had more practical effects and had a lot of practical effects.
Exactly, yeah, a lot of practical effects. It's just that you needed the prequel trilogy to kind of take the bullet and go into that uncharted territory of pushing CGI over another heap, in order to have the Lord of the Rings later on, and then have the Hunger Games, and to have Avatar. That none of those would have happened if you didn't have the prequel trilogy. You wouldn't have had Gollum if you didn't have Jar Jar. These are different things they had to create. So saying the sequel trilogy is CGI is so much better now. Yeah, why do you think that is? And you're able to pass things. There's so many things that they didn't mention that actually were CGI that they just simply didn't mention, and had people assume that it was actually realistic. And I think the cool thing about that is that we're at a point now, we're on the cusp of a whole new era where we need to treat and look at CGI in a very different way and use it, because you have so much control, in animation. One of the things I love doing when I was putting a set is that I literally have my whole set in a box in my computer, and I have full control of the lighting, over the animation, over the action that's going on. I can shoot the same scene 100 times, have the exact same action, and change the camera if I want. I'm not asking a new performance from my actors or from the staff and crew. It's not expensive, So we're at a point now where filmmaking is accessible again. And the last thing I'll say about that is that that's actually the birth of filmmaking. When film started back, like the Georges Méliès, back, if you, I don't know if you ever saw Hugo, back in the early days of film, that's what film was about. It didn't cost a lot of money. These were illusionists. These are people that were putting boards behind certain boards and doing certain camera tricks to create the illusion that you're going to another world. And then somewhere along the way, Hollywood decided they were going to pump a ton of money into this and turn it into this behemoth that it is right now. But that's not what film is. Film is using tricks to tell a story, to trick your mind to escape. That's escapism. That's what it is.
Well, with that being said, where can everybody find you, Paul, and your work?
As usual, you can find everything at minusmonkey.com. That's monkey spelled Monkee. And we're also on Facebook, and also on Instagram, and also on Twitter. And then if you specifically want to follow Yohanse, you can go to the Yohanse page on Facebook. If you specifically want to follow the Pack, just go to the Pack series on Facebook, and we're going to be dropping some really exciting new stuff. I know some people want to hear about the Pack right now, but it's some very exciting things are being wrapped up as we speak.
I'll bring you back on for sure.
Yeah.
That was the series that I really liked, and I liked Yohanse a lot too. But the Pack to me is, that was.
Well, the cool thing about it is that I have people come up to me that are like, yeah, I'm more of a Yohanse fan than a Pack fan. So people know I'm more of a Pack fan than Yohanse. And I just love that I've been blessed to be able to create two properties that appeal to different people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the cool things to get as a creator. Of course, you have some overlap. Some people appreciate both, but I have some people like, yeah, I don't really care for the other one, but I really like this one, and that's really validating to me, you know. So yeah.
I also want to thank you for the logo that you over there that you created.
Yeah.
Let me move me. There you go, right there. The logo that you created. I think it was it came out exactly with the yin and the yang and the tree of life and the Celtic Lord of the Rings type vibe. I really appreciate it. Friendly reminder, guys, if you are watching this show, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, smash the like button, hit the bell so you're notified. We're going to be bringing on lots of creators, authors. We'll be looking for people that are doing like some really cool memoirs, and we have a couple of great interviews lined up. And we have a show next week, Thursday, that we're going to be having as well. It's going to be every Thursday. We're going to go live and with a new creator or somebody that's somebody of interest, people that I just like to talk to in general. But with that being said, we will see you guys next week, Thursday. Thanks for coming on, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, it was a pleasure.